is terribly cynical, is terribly selfish. He's doing great harm to our country for his own simple survival, or for a hope of some kind of survival. And I can't believe that anybody would do that. I started the world's first green energy company in 1995, a company called Ecotricity, and I started by building windmills. I did it because I discovered that the way we made electricity was the biggest driver of the climate crisis, which I'd also recently discovered. I was living on the road 10 years, and I thought I could make more of a difference if I dropped back in and tried to change the way energy was made in Britain. And then I pioneered big wind and big solar and green gas in energy, built Britain's first electric car, done all kinds of other stuff. Yeah, I know a bit about green stuff. Been doing it for about 30 decades. 30
decades?
30 decades, yeah. That's how I feel today, 30 decades old.
So now we've got the credentials out of the way. What was your first reaction to the news today that the Prime Minister will let new gas power stations be built? He'd actually quite like to see a few of them built.
My take on this is that the Conservatives have just created a problem that doesn't exist. They talked up how they would stand side by side with the gas industry to build the new generational gas stations that we need, how that they'll make the tough short-term decisions that our country needs when it comes to building new gas-fired power stations. Nobody's been talking about this. Yesterday and for the last 14 years of Conservative rule in our country, they haven't been talking about this. It isn't a problem at all. I think it's a pre-election thing. It's Rishi Sunak burnishing his credentials to a certain segment of the country and his own party, actually, where I think he has bigger problems. Just to say, look, I'm not woke. I'm prepared to build new fossil power stations, which is economic madness as well as environment madness on top.
Yeah. What is that? Because a lot of it does feel like it is electioneering. It does feel like he is sort of going after a few of the MPs, on his backbenches who are really opposed to net zero. But where do you think that comes from? Is it part of the culture war?
I think it is. I think they've made it so. I think in last summer, for me, it began, the summer of Just Stop Oil, who I backed and, spent a lot of time in the media defending and stuff like that. And Rishi Sunak, rather than listen to the protests and the science and the economics and world opinion, he kind of doubled down and said he was going to do more drilling, not less drilling in the North Sea. And I think in that moment, he sensed that there was an electoral opportunity for him actually to be against green issues. Excuse me. It was subsequent to that he rode back on the ban of new petrol and diesel cars. I think by 5 years, he did away with the invention of 7 recycling bins and forced car sharing. He just made that stuff up. But all of that paints a picture of somebody he's almost like a right-wing shock jock when he's doing that. This is our Prime Minister saying, and I'm not going to force you to share cars and all these other socialist things, which didn't exist. And I think he thinks he's found an electoral chance here, I think. It's terribly cynical. It's terribly selfish. He's doing great harm to our country for his own simple survival or for a hope of some kind of survival. And I can't believe that anybody would do that.
You know a lot about the electric vehicle agenda, let's call it that, because that's what the Conservatives would like to call that. So you pioneered the motorway charging unit. Yeah. But the argument for Rishi Sunak pulling back the deadline from 2035 to 2030 was that the country is simply not ready. There aren't enough ports and there isn't a big enough grid in order to accommodate all the new electric vehicles. How true is that? And if it is true, why aren't we ready?
Well, what he actually said was that he was going to help hard-pressed consumers with the cost of living crisis, which, of course, the Tories created. So it was about the cost of living crisis, pushing back the cost of green measures further into the future. And when you pick that apart, the motor manufacturers themselves said by 2030, all cars will cost the same. So there won't be a premium for an electric car. So that wasn't going to save anybody anything. Right now, it's a fact that electric cars are cheaper to own, including the cost of buying them, because they're so much cheaper to run. So if you buy one today, you save money. That's another fact. And of course, people that are struggling with cost of living crisis aren't sat fretting about buying their next new car in 2030, are they? They're not thinking about buying a new car at all. So I think he missed his target by 1 million miles. People that are suffering from a cost of living crisis aren't planning to buy a new car by definition.
I'll push back on that a little bit and say, but if you were planning to buy a new car, I mean, there was some evidence that suggests that there had been some price surging on petrol cars leading up to 2030. Mm-hmm. You know, I suppose that there are quite a few people who may have been concerned about it if they were really plugged into the news.
I see. The motor Auto Trader, I think it was, I'm not sure, one of the motor magazines said that actually it would make less electric cars available in the near term. Therefore driving up the cost for motorists because people would buy less new cars, I guess. The Climate Change Committee themselves said that a 3-year delay would cost £6 billion in extra fuel costs. So the 5-year delay, by simple maths, is a £10 billion addition to fuel costs. He didn't save any money in that measure. There's no way I can see that he saved money at all. And on top of that, he maintains his target of something like 80% or 85% of all new car sales to be electric, by 2030, and I've lost my plot now of something I was going to say. I've had a long day.
You have had a long day. Well, let's talk about. So that narrative about green being unaffordable, that is something that we hear all the time. That is always the counter to any environmentalists when they're invited onto any of the media. Any journalists will probably levy that question to you. But I mean, how true is it to say that green energy the price for that will be paid by the working classes?
Oh, it's not true. And it's not true to say that we can't afford to transition rapidly to 100% green electricity. It's going to cost us a lot more money not to do that. And one of the big untruths that Rishi Sunak is telling at the moment, and he repeated it again today, or his party did, is that building new gas stations or drilling for new gas is how we get to energy independence and lower our energy bills. But we don't control the pricing of fossil fuels. In the energy crisis in 2022, we paid 10 times more for our North Sea gas to bring it here and burn it than we used to, because global markets set the price for that. So there's no energy security from making more fossil fuels here, and it can't put our energy bills down. But green energy can. It's the cheapest form of energy that we can build, and the fastest and the cleanest, and we have enough to power the country 20 times over. And it's a forever fuel. Fossil fuels are a single-use fuel, and every year, pre the energy crisis, we spent £50 billion to bring fossil fuels here to burn them, and then we spent another 50 the next year. This year it's 100 billion because of the cost, the global price of fossil fuels. 100 billion pounds going up in smoke. For a fraction of that, we could get to 100% green energy on the grid, create hundreds of thousands of jobs, nail our energy bills to the floor and keep them there, because there's no global price for the wind and the sun. We get to price it here as well as make it here and solve so many problems. It's economic madness to continue the way we are and not see the opportunity of the green economy, which I think Labour sees. In fact, I know that they see it. The question is how fast will they be able to move? That's a different topic.
Well, I'm going to come on to that topic, but I would like to, on that point about the sun being, a fuel that you can always be there. Sunak today, his defence of opening up new gas power stations is that the wind isn't always blowing and the sun isn't always shining. That is true in itself, but how important is that to generating green energy?
That's right. I just want to repeat what I said earlier. That's not new. That's not a revelation, right? We all know this. The National Grid have said we can get to 100% green electricity on the grid with no problems. And they run the thing, right? They aren't saying we need new gas-fired power stations. We all know that the wind doesn't always blow, but if you look at the statistics, it blows an awful lot of the time. We know that the sun doesn't always shine, but if you look at both of them together, they're complementary. You get twice as much solar energy in the summer as you do the winter, and you get twice as much wind in the winter as you get in the summer. And we've been combining wind and solar projects on the same grid connections, partly for that reason, for nearly 20 years now. These aren't new issues that the Tories are dragging up today. It's not a problem, actually, that we have to have. And even if it was, it's not a problem that we would solve with gas-fired power stations.
Sounds pretty sensible, what you've just laid down there.
Thank you.
So why are they doing it?
Well, right now, we've got a Conservative Party under pressure. They're facing an electoral wipeout. They can't avoid an election for very much longer at all. The writing appears to be on the wall. They're looking for something, some edge. What they tend to do is they like to divide us. Look at the fuss they made over small boat crossings across the Channel. Brexit was all about immigration, controlling immigration. Post-Brexit, our immigration has doubled. Small boat crossings have had all of the headlines and all of the attention from the Conservatives, actually, when they make up only 3.5% of total immigration into our country every year. Just 3.5%. But you wouldn't think so from all the fuss. And immigration has doubled. Immigration is arguably out of control, but it's not about small boat crossings. But this is an issue that they've chosen to divide people, like Rwanda, the Rwandan policy as well. They've chosen green as another culture war front, and we'll see what they've got left.
Is there any surprise then that you appear in conservative literature as an eco-zealot?
That began last summer, and I was honestly, I should have been flattered probably. Rishi Sunak was in Washington giving a speech about something when he name-checked me and called me an eco-zealot. And I'm like, oh my God, have you got something better to do, like run the country? Come on. Well, that was about Just Stop Oil funding, and the Sun have turned it into eco-yob. The Sunday Times called me the Green Genie 2 weeks ago, and I called Rishi Sunak a fossil fuel. So, we've all got our own names.
It's quite a nice name, actually, isn't it?
Fossil fuel.
Yeah.
Yeah, not bad. Not bad. I prefer Green Genie.
Green Genie. Okay, yeah, that's how I'll introduce you when we're speaking later. We're talking about your book later on, so that's how we'll do it. You're the Green Genie.
Yeah.
So you just talked about Just Stop Oil there. I think it's quite well known that you were funding Just Stop Oil for quite some time, or donating to Just Stop Oil. And then last summer you made the decision to move that funding from Just Stop Oil to the Labour Party because you saw that as a more constructive way of approaching the topic. And then a few months later, we hear that Labour are abandoning their Green Prosperity Plan. So, how did you react to that?
Well, first, just mild correction. I didn't switch funding to Labour. I switched the focus from Just Stop Oil to Just Stop the Tories, and having decided that we couldn't stop oil through protest. Rishi Sunak had made that clear. The only way to do it was at the ballot box, so it just became that. How did I react? I shrugged my shoulders. I thought, look, this 28 billion has become a millstone around Labour's neck. I know where it comes from. The Climate Change Committee a couple of years ago set that out as the sum of money that we needed to spend to get to net zero, and Labour adopted it, and it was exciting and great when they did. It was 2 years ago, very different economic circumstances. And so, I was in the media defending it, or rather giving my response to it. I think most people expected me to be upset, but I wasn't upset. I understand why they're doing it. The economy has taken a big downturn. We're in recession right now, and they're being sensible and saying, look, we aren't going to commit to spending money we don't know if we'll have or not. So we'll wait and see, what happens if and when we get into number 10. But at the same time, it's important to note that a lot of the things we need to do just don't need money. So if we unban onshore wind, we haven't got to put public money into it. We're building solar projects now with no public money. And those two things alone can get us to 100% green, no public money. But if we choose to spend public money, there are a lot of things we can do on the same basis that the private sector operates. So you build a project that pays its own debt, you borrow for it, it pays its own debt, it pays its own interest, and it makes a profit. Now, there's nothing wrong with the government doing that. That's how companies and economies grow, investing in sensible projects, borrowing for infrastructure. In the budget last week, the Conservatives said they were going to borrow for tax cuts, which is what Liz Truss did last summer. And it cost us £30 billion in 1 month when international money markets lost all confidence in our country. And yet the Conservatives accuse Labour of being, careless or reckless with money. I don't understand it. But anyway, that was my main thing was 28 billion, who cares, right? The number's not important. There's a lot of things we don't need money for, and there are a lot of things that we do need money for, but it will pay for itself more than.
It would be like it. So I think what was sort of missed in the discussion about Labour, and particularly this plan, was that it would have been an industrial plan. It was about building, right? And you're saying that you don't need public money for that, but...
Not for all of it.
Not for what, sorry?
Sorry, not for all of it.
Not for all of it.
Yeah. Onshore wind and solar don't need it.
There is a part of it, though, that would, if you're looking at an economy that is quite stagnant and you are looking at an energy source that is, that is unreliable and is fluctuating in price, would you not want to push the party into adopting a strategy that could sort of amalgamate both of them? Like maybe it is the time to spend.
Which is the energy source that's unreliable and fluctuating in price?
Oh, oil and gas.
Oil and gas. I mean, there's so much we can do with that money. The 28 billion has become a distraction. It's just not important. Labour will unban onshore wind on day one. They've said that repeatedly. That's the biggest change that they can make, actually. And we in the renewable energy industry don't need money to build onshore wind and solar. And we're at 50% green on the grid. We can get to 100% somewhere between 5 and 10 years from now. I think maybe 5 years from now we're at 80%. That's my guess.
The other issue that you have with building is NIMBYism. How familiar are you with NIMBYism?
I'm familiar. I've lived my life with it.
The problem that you've got when you're constructing any new energy source or any new energy resource is that you're going to have to put up power lines. So you're going to have to blight someone's natural landscape with something that possibly isn't particularly sightly, isn't particularly pleasant to look at. I mean, how often do you run into those sort of problems?
All the time. I think the problem actually is whenever you want to build anything anywhere, you upset somebody. That's a fact, right? Whether you want to build a new road, a pylon, power station, runway, think of our national infrastructure. We all benefit from it. Some of us have to live near it. And most of us don't. In any, say Heathrow, for example, most of us don't live near Heathrow. Lots of people use Heathrow. And I think it's a problem unique to the countryside that when that normality of life in a joined-up country becomes their turn to live with the infrastructure, they throw their hands up and say, oh, but, I have a lovely view. Why should I want to live with that? Build it somewhere else, kind of stuff. And, I think the term NIMBY is fairly apt. I think it's wrong for people. This infrastructure that we need, roads, schools, hospitals, runways, all of this stuff benefits our economy, benefits all of us, and somebody has to live next to it. And I think we need to be more grown up about it, actually, and say, look, windmills belong in the countryside. They do. That's where they work best. And actually, most people anyway don't find them unpleasant to look at. That's a fact. In all of the opinion polls taken ever since the wind industry began, wind energy has always had something like 70% popularity rating with the public. But it became a media myth 10 years ago that wind was unpopular. And it's not true. People appreciate the way they look. They're graceful, slow-moving, aesthetic-looking devices, but they also appreciate them for the job that they do. So I think the idea of a public that really don't want onshore wind is overplayed. There's always somebody that doesn't want it, but that doesn't represent the majority. There it is.
Where does that come from then? Why do newspapers publish so many?
It's a great story, isn't it? What do newspapers publish? What they publish? They love angst, don't they? Heroic kind of opposition to big things, and I don't know. But the government have been taking their own opinion polls forever, and wind energy sits there squarely around about 70%.
Well, when they're not talking about that, they're talking about protest, particularly in the last couple of weeks.
Are they?
Yes.
Oh, yes, the Palestinian protests. Yeah,
they are.
Which again they've tried to divide us with, right? By labelling them an extremist.
And police have been given new powers by the Home Secretary, which means they can arrest anyone who is unwilling to take off the face covering if they've been asked multiple times, which is interesting because it's actually already part of the legislation. You can actually already ask someone to take off a face covering, but it's nice to have a new announcement sometimes, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, how much does it concern you seeing this sort of quite draconian slip into protest ban?
Oh, it does concern me a lot. We saw a lot of that around Just Stop Oil. New measure after new measure announced to make it harder to protest and to make the penalties for protesting, more painful for people. People are genuinely risking their liberty now to go out and have a protest. And, I look at that and I just think to myself, are we in Russia? Are we in North Korea? The regimes we love to point the finger at in terms of their intolerance to public protest and voices of opposition. Britain is becoming like that, and I think it's a terrible thing.
It's a very dark way to end this discussion, isn't it? Can you talk a little bit? Let's end it on. So you've got a new book.
Yep.
You've got a book, but it's got a new couple of chapters, and they are very optimistic. They are very hopeful, and they are a plan for going forward, right? So it's a manifesto, but an upgraded one. So we'll now learn what we should be doing. What should we be doing?
We've got to, it boils down to voting Labour, right? The only party that can win the election that won't destroy the country, because only two parties can win. We know this, right? The Tories or Labour. It basically boils down to voting Labour. But that sounds like a That does sound like a very positive reason for voting Labour. Labour get the green economy. I think they'll be the greenest government that we've ever had by a long way. Could be one of the greenest governments in the world. I think they will change everything and unleash this new industrial revolution on Britain. And behind all of that is this simple belief, and it's based on my 30 years of work, that we have all of the technology we need for this transition in energy, transport and food. We have that. The economics are on our side in all of these sectors. It's cheaper to do them than to not do them. We have the public on our side. Increasingly, we just don't have a government that gets it. It's the only thing missing. Most important thing, therefore, is this year's election and getting a government that gets it. That's how it boils down for me.
And you would know, because according to The Sun, you are you're advising the Labour Party.
Oh, okay. I talk to them, and I read what they say in the media and stuff, and they get the green economy. I know it.
Yeah?
Yeah. It's our only hope anyway. And I'm a very optimistic person, but there's no hope if the Conservatives get back in. More drilling for oil and gas, more power stations. And we're in a recession now, 14 years of Tory rulers, and our country is on its knees. It's not just a green economy, the whole economy is being tanked at the moment by these people, this unelected prime minister, this ship of fools. If you look at that cabinet, I've never seen a cabinet so unqualified in life and in the particular topics. Where do they all come from? What have they ever done in their lives? I'm beside myself with the thought that how incompetent these people are, and yet they're running the country.
You don't want to run yourself?
No, I did think about it. I thought about it very seriously. And the more I thought about it and thought about how it would be, the more I realized it wouldn't suit my nature. And I could do better things staying on the outside.